Retired general and former Democratic presidential candidate Wesly-Clark does want one group of people put in internment camps. According to the former general, it's time for the U.S. to start interning and re-educating, quote, radicalized Muslims, we're talking about American citizens here, in order to stop lone wolf extremism. Seriously, take a look.
We are at war with this group of terrorists. They do have an ideology. In World War II, if someone supported Nazi Germany at the expense of the United States, we didn't say that was freedom of speech. We put them in a camp. They were prisoners of war. So if these people are radicalized and they don't support the United States and they're disloyal to the United States as a matter of principle, fine, that's their right. It's our right and our obligation to segregate them from the normal community for the duration of the conflict. And I think we're going to have to increasingly get tough on this.
He went on to say that our allies should also start their own internment camps for their potential lone wolf extremists. The notion itself is dangerous, and the implications are even scarier. Earlier in the same interview, Clark described the fact that lone wolves are frequently alienated young people. And he gives the example that maybe they didn't get a job or their girlfriend left them. But if being young and unemployed is the first step toward radicalization, that means almost 1 in 5 young Americans would be under surveillance and potentially placed in internment under Wesly-Clark's proposal. And the fact is, most of the domestic lone wolf terror attacks since 9/11 have been carried out by right-wing extremists, not by Muslim extremists, the ones that Clark wants to target. Here now to discuss Clark's statement and the culture of fear in America is Murtaza Hussain, journalist and political commentator at The Intercept. Welcome, Murtaza.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. What was your first reaction when you heard this statement? And by the way, isn't Wesly-Clark wrong? I thought that it was the Japanese who were put in the internment camps, many of them, the vast majority of them, loyal American citizens, and that people were actually out there boosting Hitler. I mean, Lindbergh, was, hey, we can do business with this guy.
Yeah, it was a really unfortunate comment by General Clark, and I know General Clark, and I was very surprised to hear him make this call. And yeah, it's true, in World War II, the people interned were Japanese. And I think this call for preemptively incarcerating people based on their beliefs or the ideology, well, I mean, in the midst of a tragic event, people can get emotional. That call is very dangerous because it has no real definitions. It amounts to nothing more than trying to incarcerate people based on the notion of them being pre-criminals or committing pre-crime, which something is a very slippery slope.
Yeah, this idea that also one of the things he's expressing is this fear of Muslims, basically, and the reality in the United States is that more Americans have been killed since 9/11 by right-wing terrorists than by anybody who's claiming any allegiance to Islam, and most of these right-wing terrorists claim Christianity as the basis of a lot of what they're doing. What's it going to take for America to wake up to the reality of these situations and stop the fear of the other?
Well, ironically, a lot of the response to his comments were from people who had thought that, more right-wing sovereign citizen type people who thought that he had been talking about them, actually.
Oh, really?
So it's kind of ironic. And I think that General Clark did clarify in some later statements when, his comments sort of engendered this backlash, they didn't mean to replicate Japanese internment. And he wasn't talking about Muslims per se. He was talking about people who had, in his words, had been radicalized by ISIS. And although it's a welcome clarification, I still think that interning people or detaining them who have not committed a crime but are expressing views which you view as, disloyal, as you put it, or seditious, that again is just a very slippery slope. And the fact that so many people who are sovereign citizens and are opposed to the government for other reasons felt that they were the ones he was scrutinizing, given the fact that he's typically viewed as a liberal figure in the United States, is just telling that the fact that this can be applied so broadly.
Yeah, we have millions of Muslim citizens in the United States, from conservatives to very progressive Muslims. What is it going to take? What are the steps that we need to take to break out of this fear-based mindset that, frankly, I think that Bush and Cheney just drove us into full-tilt boogie right after 9/11, and start recognizing that we're all in this together. We're a we, or an us.
Yeah, that's the ideal thing. And to General Clark's credit, I've spoken with him before, and he's sort of expressed that same sentiment that we should avoid the politics of fear, which is why it was so notable and sort of surprising to see him take this position. And I think that, unfortunately, the politics of fear are very pervasive and very compelling, and especially when an incident happens which seems to reinforce that fear. Even, it reinforces that fear on like an ethnic or religious basis, even when the facts of what occurred are not known all at once. I think it's something very hard to push back against, and I think that hammering home that same message that these, as bad as they are, they're really minor problems in comparison to some of the issues the United States has faced in its past, and staying a hold of that and sort of resisting these people who are trying to instrumentalize these incidents to push forth other policies such as aggressive wars or torture or mass detention, which in all likelihood will exacerbate the threats we face rather than diminish them.
Yeah, it seems to me that this is just crazy. I mean, our tobacco companies kill more people in America every week than 9/11.
Generally, a lot of people would say you reap what you sow. So how do we fix self-radicalized lone wolves domestically?
Well, we've got to identify the people who are most likely to be radicalized. We've got to cut this off at the beginning. There are always a certain number of young people who are alienated. They don't get a job, they lost a girlfriend, their family doesn't feel happy here. And we can watch the signs of that, and there are members of the community who will reach out to those people and bring them back in and encourage them to look at their blessings here. But I do think on a national policy level, we need to look at what self-radicalization means, because we are at war with this group of terrorists. They do have an ideology. In World War II, if someone supported Nazi Germany at the expense of the United States, we didn't say that was freedom of speech. We put him in a camp. They were prisoners of war. So if these people are radicalized and they don't support the United States and they're disloyal to the United States as a matter of principle, fine, that's their right. It's our right and our obligation to segregate them from the normal community for the duration of the conflict. And I think we're going to have to increasingly get tough on this, not only in the United States, but our allied nations like Britain and Germany and France are going to have to look at their domestic law procedures.
General Wesly-Clark, as always, great to see you, sir. Thanks for your time, and I want to pass along to our viewers.
Usually I don't care for stories about who said what. Trump said this, Obama said that. This stupid talking head said something predictably stupid. Usually I'm like, who cares? People are stupid. Why wouldn't they say stupid things? But this story from the antimedia.org about something someone said actually did pique my interest recently, because it reveals how a lot of people think, I think, but they're too scared to say in our PC world. The story was about a recent interview that former U.S. General Wesly-Clark gave on MSNBC. Clark is a West Point grad and former NATO commander. So they were talking about terrorism, of course, because that topic occupies about, 50% of television news airtime in the U.S.? They were talking about it in the context of Americans who get radicalized and sympathize with terrorists. And during the interview, Clark said some really scary stuff. First, he pretty much advocated that all of us keep a suspicious eye on each other to root out the radicals who might not be patriots. He said, we've got to identify the people who are most likely to be radicalized and cut them off at the beginning. There are young people who are alienated, and it's up to their neighbors to bring them back into thinking about all the blessings they have here in America. In other words, don't let those alienated youth question anything about America, and if they do, try to brainwash them about being good little patriots again. But that wasn't the worst part. This is the worst part. Clark went on to say, in World War II, if someone supported the Nazis, we didn't say that was freedom of speech. We put them in a camp. They were prisoners of war. So if these people do not support the United States, that's their right, but it's our right and obligation to segregate them from the normal community for the duration of the conflict. In other words, Clark was very obviously thinking that Americans who don't support their country's war on terror should be locked up in internment camps and be prisoners of war indefinitely. It's not surprising that he thinks that, because I'm sure a lot of patriotic Americans who support the war on terror think that too. It's just surprising that he said it, because it's so incredibly un-PC. That's what Americans like me, who don't support our endless wars, are up against. And that's just another example of how dangerous it's become to actually exercise our right to free speech here in the land of the supposedly free.
Generally, a lot of people would say you reap what you sow. So how do we fix self-radicalized lone wolves domestically?
Well, we've got to identify the people who are most likely to be radicalized. We've got to cut this off at the beginning. There are always a certain number of young people who are alienated. They don't get a job, they lost a girlfriend, their family doesn't feel happy here. And we can watch the signs of that, and there are members of the community who will reach out to those people and bring them back in and encourage them to look at their blessings here. But I do think on a national policy level, we need to look at what self-radicalization means, because we are at war with this group of terrorists. They do have an ideology. In World War II, if someone supported Nazi Germany at the expense of the United States, we didn't say that was freedom of speech. We put him in a camp. They were prisoners of war. So if these people are radicalized and they don't support the United States and they're disloyal to the United States as a matter of principle, fine, that's their right. It's our right and our obligation to segregate them from the normal community for the duration of the conflict. And I think we're going to have to increasingly get tough on this, not only in the United States, but our allied nations like Britain and Germany and France are going to have to look at their domestic law procedures.
General Wesly-Clark, as always, great to see you, sir. Thanks for your time, and I want to pass along to our viewers.
Protect your guns with the Safe and Vault store. That's the Safe and Vault store. Click the link below right now. A price match guarantee on all of its popular safes. Give them a call today. Free shipping, enter promo code Second Amendment, 2ND Amendment for 10% off your order through the end of the month, into July, and also free shipping. Click the link below right now. That's a Safe and Vault store. Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green, and you're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. It's July 21st, 2015. General Wesly-Clark, a 4-star general, has all kinds of medals, even medals I haven't even heard of, honorary medals I've never heard of from around the world, made a very outlandish, extreme, controversial, and insane comment yesterday. I believe it was on MSNBC. Many of you are probably familiar with him. He was very critical of the Bush administration post the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks, of which he accused the Bush administration of going to war in countless country after country, whether or not it was Iraq or Afghanistan, overseas, post 9/11, even though the respective countries like Iraq, had nothing to do with the alleged attacks. Now yesterday, on MSNBC, I believe it was, made a comment warning Americans that if they disagreed with the government, they should be put in internment camps. These are some of the most controversial, extreme, anti-American comments I have ever heard in the history of being in this business, in the history of being alive, in the history of AMTV. General Wesly-Clark, a 4-star, highly respected general, said that if you disagree with the government, you should be put in a concentration camp, maybe even potentially killed. He says that during times of war, like during World War II, for example, if you were anti the United States during World War II in support of the Nazis, he uses that as an example. You had no rights. You were just put into a concentration camp, an internment camp, a FEMA camp. Remember, we did this to the Japanese Americans around this time because they had slanted eyes. How does the politically correct narrative in the politically correct community that makes up America today feel about that? And feel about what General Wesly-Clark is saying to countless Americans, millions and millions of people. More importantly, why is he saying it? Again, these are some of the most anti-American, scandalous, controversial, and insane comments I have ever heard in the history of the world. I mean, he's telegraphing, it's no longer a conspiracy, he's telegraphing concentration camps for Americans, political dissidents. Now, of course, he's using it under the guise of ISIS, you know, with all these ISIS attacks, these attacks by ISIL, the new government CIA-created boogeyman. We used to have Al-Qaeda, but allegedly Osama bin Laden, who was killed multiple times, and then his body thrown off a U.S. warship without a selfie being taken or any DNA evidence to prove it. Again, he died many times over. Now the new boogeyman is ISIS, and it's the smokescreen for the reason we're fighting all of these wars overseas. The same wars that General Wesly-Clark had criticized on Democracy Now! Very famously post the 9/11 September 2001 terror attacks, and criticized heavily the Bush administration for invading these countries under false pretenses. Bold-faced lies. Now no longer a conspiracy, but a four-star general warning countless Americans and those of you tuning in around the world that if you disagree with the federal government, if you disagree with Barack Obama, if you disagree with his radical policies, they'll just declare an act of war and put you in a concentration camp and maybe even put you to death. Again, these aren't my words. These are the words of a four-star general who I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but this is what he said yesterday. Why is the general making these comments? Well, I think it's probably more than likely a trial balloon. What is a trial balloon, Christopher? Well, basically, he's putting it into the public consciousness. They're testing it. They're testing the waters. They're creating a narrative around it. They want to hear public discourse and discussion. See the dumb ass sheeple groundlings. See how they deal with the fact that they're kind of telegraphing you in the not too distant future, under the declaration of war, they're going to start gathering up countless Americans and throwing you in freaking concentration camps. You know, if you're anti-Obama, and let's say you vote for Trump, who Senator McCain here in Arizona, it's amazing that he gets elected because there's countless Arizonans here locally that just hate this guy. I mean, I've been to the town hall meetings interviewing him. It seems like people just hate the guy. He says that Trump is igniting the crazies. So maybe people like General Wesly-Clark and the people that he worked for will decide that anybody that votes for Trump or that supports Trump should be put in a concentration camp, a FEMA camp. And maybe they'll even put you to death for disagreeing with Hillary Rodham Clinton in 2016. So, you know, who knows? Maybe General Wesly-Clark owes certain people something, which is why he's putting out this trial balloon, putting this into public consciousness, creating public discourse around this to see and to kind of gauge the reaction from the people, gauge the reaction from the mainstream corporatist media that again is pushing and propelling this message. See what people do. See if they're comfortable with it. You know, in this politically correct transgender society, a four-star freaking general talking about putting Americans in concentration camps. You know, it's absolutely insane. You know, I think what General Wesly-Clark said yesterday was probably the most radical statement I've ever heard. And even though I entirely detest it and disagree with it and think he's a piece of shit for saying it, I still don't think General Wesly-Clark should go to a concentration camp. That's totally and entirely and utterly anti-American. The whole idea and principle of America is that we're allowed to be political dissidents. The country was founded on political dissidents. Who do you think our founding fathers were? Radical political dissidents. That's what established America. That's what established this great country. So again, this is a trial balloon, folks. They're putting this out into the public discourse to gauge public reaction because in the not too distant future, again, the wheels have already come off the wagon. We've already derailed. But during an act of war, when they declare an act of war, they'll just simply put anyone that's anti-Obama or anti-Hillary, for example, maybe you voted for Trump, you'll be the ones forced into concentration camps. They'll just gather you up, call it an act of war, because by then it'll be World War III. It'll be very serious. People will be scared. People will be shitting their pants. And at that time, General Wesly-Clark, who's probably being teed up by Hillary Clinton right now in 2016 to be the Secretary of State or be potentially the Secretary of Defense, or God knows what else, other plans they have for him. Who knows? Maybe he pissed people off in the Bush administration, the powers that be. Maybe he's got to make these comments to make amends. Who knows? But they're probably teeing him up for the next administration. Or maybe he's just a mouthpiece of the administration, a mouthpiece of the government. This is insane. This is utterly outlandish. Again, the most anti-American comments, discourse I've ever heard in the history of doing this. Who knows why he made this comment? Who knows why they're putting this out again into the public sphere and into the public consciousness. What can you do about it? You can share the word, folks. You can get it out. You can tell your friends and family this is no longer a friggin' conspiracy theory. They're talking FEMA camps here in the United States of America. Concentration camps. Isn't this what the bullshit mainstream media, again, the victor always writes history, tells us that Hitler supposedly did? You know, gathered up all the Jews, this is what they tell us, and just gassed them as political dissidents and dissidents of his regime? How is this any different? How is what Wesly-Clark talking about any different? You see, the victor writes history. See, if it was the other way around, if Hitler won, if Nazi Germany had won, guess who the Nazis would have been? America. Americans would have been the Nazis. And they're making Nazi-like comments right now. No longer conspiracy, a 4-star general warning Americans, millions of people, about concentration camps here in the United States of America. I mean, I can't make this shit up. It's just the truth. So what you can do about it is get the word out. Share this video. Like this video. Give it to a friend. Give it to a family member. Send it via email. Warn them. Hashtag it. POS Wesly-Clark. Or POS Clark. Or POS General Wesly-Clark. Piece of shit Wesly-Clark. Hashtag that. Something along those lines, and share this video. Again, General Wesly-Clark making the most outlandish, anti-American, radical, insane Nazi comments I have ever heard in the history of America. The truth. Get out everywhere. I'm Christopher Green. Hard hitting in your face, and click the link below to support our sponsor.